Today, Pamela Geller is here with David Littman, human rights activist, passionate human rights activist at the UN. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, David?
Well, I started in 1986 at the UN in Geneva, and that was then called the Commission on Human Rights, and there was the subcommission that takes place in the summer, so it's something in the region of 10 weeks in a year. As an NGO, then the main representative, as I was, for the World Union for Progressive Judaism, which stopped after a problem with the American ambassador, who happened to be Jewish at the time, in 1991, and then I went to non-Jewish NGOs and have been with the Association for World Education, which is not Jewish, of course, since 1997, and back with the World Union for Progressive Judaism since the year 2000, because they found no one else who was able to speak for them in an adequate way. So my experience has been that I always quote Spinoza: every man has the right to think what he wants and to say what he thinks. And there are certain things that are not said at the council because they are considered taboo subjects.
Why?
They're taboo subjects because they are embarrassing, they are, I don't say politically, I say religiously sensitive. And so you are not expected, even Amnesty and Human Rights Watch and all the other very respectable NGOs will keep off the question of anything that touches on Sharia law. I don't have to mention them all, but stoning of women, honor killings, female genital mutilation, marriage at 9 years old in Iran, Yemen, and you name it, Sudan, because you do have to refer to Sharia, and that is a crime of I would say les OIC, the Organization of the Islamic Conference. And I am probably the only one, I won't say who has the courage, because once you've been to a nice, good English public school, and you're captain of cricket, tennis, and boxing, you don't even consider these questions. You build an empire, and you fight back, and you say what has to be said. And I always appreciate the, now and again an interpreter says to me, it's difficult when you quote Shakespeare and Churchill, and you're going a bit quick, but go on speaking, we're all listening. I put my hand against my heart and I say I have to go on, because in fact, if I don't deal with certain questions of this nature, for instance, the Rushdie fatwa, 1989, you would have thought that someone would have had the courage to go on hammering home, but no. 3 states spoke very briefly. No one mentioned Rushdie by name, and I spoke 2 or 3 times. And I always tell the funny story that someone told me, you know, they could bump you off. So I went straight to the Iranian delegation. It was St. Valentine's Day in 1989, and I said, they say that you're going to bump me off. Mr. Littman, why would we want to do a thing like that? I said, I don't know. But you should bear in mind that if you did, everyone would know it was you. They laughed so much that 20 years later, last year, came back the young secretary who's now ambassador, Iranian, you know, dressed in the usual style on his way to New York. He mentioned Iranian Jews he was going to see there. How are you, etc. I said, you know, Mr. Ambassador, sometimes when I think of Ahmadinejad, and I always pronounce him with the mad, with the stress, Ahmadinejad, he must have been put in there by the Mossad. Now, if I tell you that he laughed, it will give you an idea. No one else would dare do that because they would be afraid. I treat it as a joke, and he did too.
Yeah.
Because you're speaking their language, and they know they can't fool you by lying through their teeth. It won't work.
But they don't like what you say, David. Did they not stop you from speaking? Were you not ejected from the UN? You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, that was a very dramatic moment. It was during the Durban II, as they call it, the follow-up to the Durban Conference of 2000, 9/11. So this took place in April 2009, and you've only got 2 or 3 minutes, I can't remember if it's 2 or 3, and I was speaking for the Association of World Education and the World Union, dealing with another very interesting thing, to give you the atmosphere, if I may call it, right? There was a very nice film where, I won't go back, it's a French film of 50 years ago with the word atmosphere. But what happened was that the slave trade, which is always spoken about, the transatlantic slave trade, with exhibitions at the UN, never will they speak about the Arab 1,000-year-old slave trade and the Ottoman system of taking the Christians as slaves regularly, which went on for centuries, which is why there's such antagonism between the Serbs and the Turks for so long, and the Greeks. Now, they're speaking about paying indemnities that America and the Europeans should pay for what they did, forgetting that not only were the Arabs taking slaves until the end of the, Churchill describes it in 1899 as a journalist, but it's not, they have an exhibition and they won't put that on exhibition. You'll only see the slave, not the slave trade now in Saudi Arabia or in Mauritania, not the Arab slave trade in history, but only the transatlantic slave trade. So I spoke about that, stressed that, spoke about other things, Judeophobia, which is rampant in the Arab Muslim world, which I never fail to speak about, and 1 or 2 other issues very briefly. And then I got up, finished, and I happened to see 1 or 2 ambassadors or their secretaries or whatever counselors that I knew, and Norway, I think, Denmark, and I gave them my statement. And as I'm going out, the African, very well-dressed African representative of the Organization of the Islamic Conference, he saw me and I said to him, I'm sorry, I was a bit harsh on the OIC. He said, Mr. Littman, you always are, but give me a copy of your speech, of your statement. So as I'm handing it to him, 2 guards grabbed me by the arms, that the Secretariat had decided that since I was, follow this, distributing material, meaning anything, it could have been Playboy or something, I'm distributing material, I was literally frog marched at my age out of the big main hall where Haile Selassie came in 1936. So quite embarrassing, incredible, and they tried to take away my badge. But isn't this a bit boring for your...
No, it's interesting because it tells me just how biased the UN is, that even just to say something, truth begets hate.
Well, they'll say it's the rules. They'll say you know the rules. So my question is, am I allowed to give a compliment if I'm asked for my card? What exactly is distributing distributing material? They won't tell you.
No,
you think you have a... Well, I'm giving you this, I'll perhaps go back to it, but just to tell you, a little before that I had another fight. I was being stopped regularly, all my papers were being searched. Now, there's no rule to they can say we don't want things being handed round, because there would be maybe the Falun Gong would come in with papers and put them around. So they took the chance to do it with me. Now, the funny thing happens when they come in, I'm going through, and all the guards are very friendly to me, but they've been given instructions. You put a uniform on someone and give them instructions.
Yes, we
and
know.
Anything can happen. And this Sophie, a very nice gal there, they're searching my stuff, and they're searching UN written statements that we've made that I happen to be carrying, 40, and my statement I'm going to give. And a fellow who doesn't even know how to read English is trying to read my text. I said, no, forget it. I grabbed it and I put it in my bag. I said, this is becoming ridiculous. Sophie, where is this law from? She said, there's a law, we've been told. I said, I want to know the exact number. It's got to be a Director General ruling. So she gave me a number. I went and got it. It had nothing to do with it. It's just to check if anyone happens, they think he might have arms. So after I said that, knowing that the head guard was standing next to me, I said, if that ever happens to me again, I'll make a public complaint and a press conference, because it's intolerable that we're being searched for papers. Since that moment, having stood up firm, it doesn't happen anymore.
Oh.
But if you don't do it, it does. So what happened was I was ushered out, and they said, we want your badge. And I had a light stroke then. I wasn't in good shape. So I had the right to have a car to come in, the doctor's permission, and they wanted to take everything away from me. And I simply said, look, I want to see it in writing. They were completely taken aback, the people, the guards. And I said, yes, it's got to be in writing, otherwise you cannot act without authority from someone above you. I want to see that authority. Well, that took some time, and luckily, I won't name names, but someone very high up, who was very friendly to me, decided that too much was too much. I mean, I went through a kangaroo court session. It was very disturbing. They wanted to take away my badge for 3 months.
Unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I've written it up. You'll see it all on Jihad Watch. And in the end, this fellow told the guy who was responsible for that, and I won't name any names, simply to stop. And the result was, it stopped. And now everyone is treating me once again with great respect. Why? Because I stood up, didn't allow myself to be browbeaten,
Bullied, yeah.
bullied. I remember when I was at school, there was a bully, a Dutch fellow. When I was very young, I was good at boxing, and he kept bullying me. And then he said he wanted to box me publicly in the school, a school of 500 boys, and I was one of the better boxers, but I was young. And what happened was he hit me with his fist, but with the inside of his fist. And he stood there thinking I would fall, and I didn't. And he got one in the plexus and another one on the chin. He went down. After that, he became the best friend I've ever had, because he knew it wouldn't work. Well, the same thing's happened. It doesn't work at the UN. I've got people on my side who admire or appreciate that things have to be said. And there are few people, for instance, the ladies, they're always fighting against FGM, but they can't touch the question that, for instance, in Egypt, I mean, it's pharaonic. It's nothing to do with Islam per se. But according to the tradition, the prophet is going by a tent and he hears this little baby screaming. What's that? He asks. This is the hadith. And they say, they're doing this. They're cutting out everything. So the prophet says, if you have to do it with a light hand. Result is Persia, you don't have it. Syria, you don't have it. Morocco, you don't have it. But all around the Gulf, you have it, because they use the Shafia. I've got the text here in Arabic, which I never speak as a historian without the proof. So in Egypt, if I had to ask you what is the percentage of poor girls who were mutilated every year, what would you guess? 10, 20, 30, what would you guess?
No, I know the answer from you.
From me, 96%.
I know that
Now,
answer
it's
from you.
so horrifying but because there's a law against it, and we're only saying that Al-Azhar must pass a fatwa.
Yeah.
If Tantawi had the courage, not to say something vague, because the last fatwas that came out, 49, 51, 81, they say circumcision is obligatory, excision, or call it what you like, is the parents should do their duty. Now, illiterate parents or mothers, they do their duty, they do what was done before, and they're sending, from Europe, they're sending back children and doing it in Europe. You know how many in Geneva alone? 1,500.
Wow.
15,000 in Switzerland, hundreds of thousands in Europe. Girls, 3 million a year. UNICEF figures I'm giving you, not me, UNICEF. But the girls, the women who are dealing with this are very respectable. very hardworking, doing a fantastic job. They tell me they can't touch that. If they mention anything to do with Islam, the people who are cooperating with them, because they're against it, Mrs. Mubarak and all the others, they're against it. But they can't do anything from a religious point of view. And so when I speak, and I went up to her, she's an African lady from Kenya, and I went up to her and I said, I hope I didn't embarrass you. No. She said, go on. Meaning, keep on, you're the only one who's dealing with that aspect.
Are they dealing with the UN human rights? Are they dealing with the Cairo Declaration? What are they using, and how pervasive has the Cairo Declaration?
Well, the Cairo, I was the first one. I must be a bit, you know what Oscar Wilde said, I don't make a virtue out of false modesty. So I can say that I was the first one to realize what was happening with the Cairo Declaration, which came in 1990. It's called the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights in Islam.
Right.
It started in Tehran in 1989 with a meeting of foreign ministers, 26 of them, I remember, and finally became the Cairo Declaration, which is now accepted. And they're bringing in a new charter, which is based on that. Everything is conditional upon the Sharia. Articles 24 and 25 are very clear. Now, since there is no equality between Muslims and non-Muslims, and no equality between Muslim women and Muslim men in Sharia, and all sorts of things can happen. You can be stoned under the Sharia. It's clear that there is no relationship whatsoever between the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948 and the International Covenants, which are very respectable and very clear, and the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights, which I've analyzed. I did it in Middle East Quarterly, Islamism Goes Strong with the UN, but ever since it came out, I was the first one to raise this, quoting a Muslim liberal lawyer who denounced it at the time. His name will come back to me, Dieng. His name, it's not Simon Dieng, who's the famous fellow.
Who will be speaking at our June 6th
who is wonderful. He's wonderful.
Rally.
We got him to speak at the UN in a big parallel conference. He's wonderful. He came. It was very moving because we had a big collateral conference as NGOs. It was the International Humanist and Ethical Union, the Association of World Education, Association of World Citizens, etc. And we had we had Ayan Hirsi Ali, we had Batyor, I was there, Professor Janssen, he came, Simon Deng, and the subject was victims of jihad. It was Muslims, it was women, dhimmis, and apostates. Wow. And we took the whole day. It was, and poor Simon, he came and he started speaking about himself, and he was so taken by emotion that he broke down, and someone had to read his text for him. That was in 2005. So we're doing what has to be done, and fortunately, it's not, I mentioned 2 NGOs I speak for others, but I'm back in the saddle. I was in bad shape, I didn't want to go anymore, but I realized that, you have a duty to carry out in life, and I've had a few, and this is one of them, which must be done, because otherwise, and they are slowly gaining, I can tell you, they're slowly taking over the council. Everyone realizes it's pathetic. It's, I say, it reminds me, I always give the example of the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale of the emperor, who asked the tailors to prepare a suit, and they had no material, but they told the emperor that they had dressed him. So the emperor believed what he was told. He went out, but he was naked. And all the people, seeing the emperor naked, they couldn't do anything until a little child raised its hand and said, "Mommy, the emperor is naked." So I say the council is naked. All these people are naked. They don't want to recognize the obvious. And I give you another example. They have now, is this of interest?
Of course.
They have what they call complementary standards. It's another way for the OIC and the Muslim countries, and not only, to show what's called cultural relativism. So, you have the Swedish delegate will get up. It was in October. I think I put it up. It was on a couple of sites. The New English Review, Jihad Watch, etc. Last October, and the question was freedom of religion, freedom of opinion and expression, and the Swedish delegate gave a very nice explanation of what we stand for. The Judeo-Christian Enlightenment values as defined in the Universal Declaration, all the rest. And then I got up, a lot of people spoke. You heard Saudi Arabia, it was a joke. It sounded, Islam has always done this. Islam was the first to do this, If you listen to what the Muslim delegates say about Islam having introduced human rights with the famous Constitution of Mecca, you just have to read more about that and you'll understand what really happened. But still, that's what we get. So then came my turn, and I didn't even know one could speak there. I saw an American, indigenous American, Indian, if that's it's not the right word, who was there, who was always attacking America. We get along well. I mean, he's from Alaska. Why should America have taken our land? It's genuine, it's authentic. And so we get along well, and I suddenly saw him. I said, "Huh? Are we able to speak?" He said, "Yes. We're only 3 NGOs." So I kept raising my hand. I was able to speak something like 10 times. And one of the times I asked them, "Look, I've been hearing with great interest freedom of religion here. And don't forget, we've got America, Canada, Australia, Sweden, all the states were there, about, I'll say all, let's say 100 were there. And only 3 NGOs. And I said, I would like to ask a question to all the delegates present and have an answer which would correspond to the reality. In your states, are there any laws which would not permit someone to change his religion? Because according to the Universal Declaration, and I read, right, everyone has a religion, changes religion, do what you like. I'd like to know whether there is such legislation which puts someone in prison or condemns him to death, or doesn't give him a identity card, which is the case, of course, in Egypt. And if so, surely this is in total contradiction with what has been said here and what is in the international covenants that everyone here has signed and ratified. Now, do you think that anyone reacted? Not even Canada or America, because that would have embarrassed the Egyptians, the Saudis, the Iranians, and then I asked, and a marriage at 9 years old. I always raised it. I raised it in Georgetown University. I don't blame it on Muhammad. In medieval Europe and in other places, you married very long. The girls died in 2022, 1,000 years ago, whatever. But today, it's part of the law since the Shah was toppled. In Iran, it's part of the law that you can marry at 9 years old, and you've seen many cases in the New York Times. But how does this fit in with the covenant on the rights of the child? You see, it speaks about 18, but then it speaks about, it gives the, I don't have it with me, it refers to legislation in each country, and of course, right, in each country it will be
what they want.
Totally different. When they tried to change that law, 2000, they tried to change it. The moderate Muslims wanted to raise the age, not to the Shah's, 18, but to 14. Now, what happened? The Majlis, the parliament, had a big session, And the mullahs got up and said, we've put so much effort into this law which corresponds to Sharia, we don't accept to change it. And since then it has remained, since 1989, at 9 years old, because Muhammad married Aisha. At 6 actually, with toys, 6. When I mentioned this in Georgetown, one of the Muslims there went nuts and started shouting and went out, came back, said she was 18. I said, I gave him all the sources, you know, Ibn Ishaq, Ibn Aman, and said, look, I never heard of a girl with toys at 18. It seems a bit old. Surely you've got it wrong. I mean, it's clear, it's 6, and he consummated the marriage at 9, but I'm afraid he did other things with her before consummating the marriage. So that is something one's not supposed to say, and there is no point in saying it. The only point we have is today. Is it acceptable under international law to permit such barbarism as female genital mutilation, marriage at 9 years old to an 80-year-old man? There's a recent case where the girl asked for a divorce at 11. If you remember, it was in the New York Times. So I'm raising these things, no one else will touch it. And they have to be raised, and by the way, everyone listens. When I start, if you see all the last film, even the cameraman, when I was being stopped by the 3rd time by the Egyptian to have me booted out, the cameraman came back to me and showed me smiling to myself, because I knew he would make a fool of himself. And I told I joked with the Egyptian ambassador, he's not the ambassador, I said, you know, I don't know what I'd do without your number 2. So, you know, the only thing is to laugh, make fun, and ridiculize them.
But they are gaining. You said they are gaining. So
they are gaining.
I mean, what can be achieved? This Human Rights Council sounds like an anti-human rights council.
Yes, it's human rights. But you see, if you've had a description already of what's happening. The new since the Mecca conference. The 3rd Islamic Summit Conference in December 2005 at Mecca. By the way, it's very interesting that I was then in Denmark about these Danish cartoons with Rose Fleming. We were 5 people speaking. I was there with Batyor and 2 or 3 others. And there was no big problem then. It was in October. It was only when they came, the mullah, the ulama, came from Denmark, and the Arab League, they started to make a big deal of it. They started killing only after. The same thing with the Rushdie fatwa. Khomeini learned about it very late. He started moving, and then they started killing people. So the situation is that it's getting totally out of hand. However, your new, I've forgotten her name, you've got a lady ambassador now. She's not the incumbent in Geneva, but she's leading the delegation coming from Washington for the occasion. She was very good, she was very firm. I went up to her after she spoke, and I quoted her a nice biblical proverb. I said, Madam, a word, as the good proverb says, a word fitly said is like golden apples in a silver frame. She liked it.
I like it too. I know that feeling. I get it once in a great while.
So the answer is, it's going down the drain. I believe that there is nothing that can save it, my own belief. And I go farther. I wouldn't dare do that again now. I could do it 2 or 3 years ago. You remember the Walt Disney films with the famous castle on the hill. And this, of course, is Ludwig II who built it in Bavaria. Beautiful place if you've ever been there.
I bet you didn't know that.
It's great. great place. It's the Neuschwanstein, the new swan thing. And so I now refer to the UN as the Palais-Schwanstein. In other words, not the Neuschwanstein. The tourists will flock from all over the world to see what was the Palais des Nations, but the question of human rights, I mean, by the way, the fellow Ludwig II who built that, it so impressed Walt Disney that he put it in on his film. Ludwig II, he used to feel like Louis XIV, l'État c'est moi, the state it's me, but of course he had become a nominal leader. He wasn't really running the country, but the UN, the Human Rights Council, they almost say les droits de l'homme c'est nous, human rights it's us, and they refer to themselves as the conscience of the world or the international community. And I say when I was Arte, the famous French television program, cultural, they did a big interview just before the famous Durban 2 thing in April 2009. And how would you sum it up? And I said, look, we were on the 8th floor, beautiful view of the lake. And I said, over there on the other side of the lake, Lord Byron sat with Percy Bysshe Shelley, the famous Shelley, the famous poet, with his girlfriend, Mary Godwin, then became his wife, Mary Shelley. And it was raining like mad. I mean, I didn't say all this. I told her what I would say, and then I said it, but you should have it all, because it's Villa Diodati. They sat there, it was pouring with rain, 1816. And Byron said, let's write horror stories. He came out with Dracula or something like that, but she came up with Frankenstein.
Right, I know.
And then she became his wife afterwards. So I simply said this. I said, sometimes I feel as if Frankenstein, when I hear the nonsense I'm hearing here, Frankenstein has got up from the Villa Diodati where he was created by Mary Godwin. He crosses the lakes with his long legs, comes into the Palais Schwanstein, Palais des Nations, on his way to the North Pole. So if I may give you a rather symbolic feeling when I say that, now I could say that a year ago as a joke, like I could say something is rotten in the state of this council, and the Romanian president accepted it as a joke. The Egyptian tried to use that 2 months later to get me kicked out. He insulted I was stopped 3 times for no reason. And then I asked the Romanian, he's very friendly. I mean, I said, how did, Mr. Ambassador, why did you have to stop me? He said, I saw, but maybe I shouldn't say it, but it's 2 years ago. I saw the body movements of some of the members of the council, and I knew that it would lead to points of order without end, because I was dealing with, it was Gaza as usual, condemning Israel, and they were working on the resolution. And I came in with the Hamas Charter and said the root of the problem is the Hamas Charter, which is genocidal, which has never been condemned, and I've been condemning it. I was the first one to bring an Arabic and an English translation. The PLO asked me for a copy. January the 31st, 1989, 6 months after it came out. And no one has ever raised it. Now, can you imagine the Jews or the Christians or the Hindus coming up with a genocidal charter saying that inside the Hamas Charter, Article 7 says the last judgment will not come until a tree and a stone will cry out, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him. And this is Article 7 before the famous slogan about, the path of jihad and in the way of Allah. So all I can say is that it's hopeless. It's going downhill. I don't think it'll last, but I'd like to be there when we pull down the curtain. In fact, I tried to give that image. I'm sorry to be so fluffy this morning, but it's so nice to be in New York. And I remember when they passed the first defamation of religion resolution, the OIC pushed it through. And in those days, you could put things out on the table and no one would stop you. It could be, you write something, put it on the table, they read it or they don't. And I put out on the table, and I said to the thing, I said, when Napoleon won the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, Pitt the Younger, who was then Prime Minister, he simply said, because Napoleon knocked everyone out, and it wasn't till Waterloo that it was stopped, 10 years later. And Pitt the Younger, a year before he died, said, roll up that map of Europe. It won't be needed these next 10 years. So that was my quote in 1999, and I say the same thing now, roll up that map of the Council. It won't be needed these next 10 years. Unfortunately, for those who believe in the international covenants and our freedom of opinion to express it as Spinoza put it, which someone I quote whenever I can, and then they can't stop me. They can't stop you quoting Spinoza, would be.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank
very
you.
much.
On that hopeless note, which we knew.
You had it.
No, I mean, we knew it was hopeless, but to get such a reliable witness, such an articulate.
Well, it's I hope I haven't bored your listeners with too many.
Well, our listeners like to know what's going on, and very rarely do we get someone who's on the inside, who witnesses it firsthand, who sees what's happening, how it happened, as opposed to most of us who just basically have our faces pressed up against the window.
Yeah, but one thing is very important. Don't run down the biggest mistake is to run down what the UN is doing in general. Wonderful things are being done. I give, if I may, a last example. Sudan forbade the use of the word slavery. I always call a slave when they were taking slaves. I even represented Christian Solidarity International, and they freed up to 85,000 Christian and animist slaves. But if a UN delegate had dared speak about anything other than abducted people, children, if he'd used the word slave, they would have cut off humanitarian aid, so they couldn't. So what I mean is there's a lot of good things being done at the UN. There is.
I don't disagree with you, David, but...
What do you do when you're dealing with a Hitler or a Stalin?
Well, exactly. So Hitler was good to his dog. So does that make him redeemable in some way? I just think that if food is poisoned or there's poison in the blood, the whole system is poisoned.
No.
You seem to think that without the UN, that good things wouldn't happen.
No. You can't. Yeah, but you must understand there's a lot of wonderful. I must say this is very important that you have this system where the states have their votes. For instance, this is very important. Excuse me, I was telling too many jokes before. The African states will have an agreement, not the African Union. It's about, if I'm not mistaken, 42 or 50 states. They will never criticize another African state. The Congo, the worst, most horrible things. Sri Lanka, there was an article in the Boston Herald just two days ago on what's it called, the Boston Herald? Is it the
Boston Globe?
The Boston Globe. They were speaking, well, the UN must start acting. They don't realize you have the voting system, which makes it impossible to, for instance, Sri Lanka a year ago, they had finally had something, not just condemning Israel, but on Sri Lanka, and they finally praised the Sri Lankan government after what was happening.
I just think good men will do good works, and I think the UN is basically a collective a negation of humanity, and it seems to do such ill. Its objective is to demonize, delegitimize Israel. Israel, to me, is the bellwether of humanity.
Well, yeah, okay. I was giving you the example of when I was stopped, dealing with the charter. But if you read what Vieiro de Mello, a Brazilian fellow, he was the High Commissioner. He was killed. Yes. In Baghdad with 20 people. One of the people now lost her husband. She has a little baby. It's baby now 5 years more. It's a terrible thing. But I keep quoting him because he pointed out the reason the commission had to collapse. And what I do is I read what he said in his last written statement, which he also read, because I have it here actually. But I could read it to you if you like. What I would.
We have to close. We're closing.
Shall I read you the thing from Popper?
No, actually, the tape is going, so we have to close. We have to say, thank you very much.
Okay. Anyway, he's the man to follow. We must quote the decent people at the UN who are trying to change it against all the odds and not blow the whole thing up. What we want, you're not going to, because you have the wrong government in the United States, you're not going to say, I don't want the United States, let's be all independent states.
It's been wrong for decades. It's been wrong since Zionism is racism. But we could have this debate. We will continue to debate the UN. I am against, he is quasi for. David, thank you very much.
I'm not for, I'm for the good things.
I know.